Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks. Bucks basketball is back. We have a game to react to, a quarter where everything went right for the Bucks, and 3 quarters not so much. Plus another injury to dig into, and it's only the preseason. We get into that conversation next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, as we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Frank, it's not even a tale of two halves in this game because it was a tale of 1 quarter versus 3 quarters. But the way this game started, you felt pretty good. I mean, it felt good just to see a Bucks basketball game again after, I think it was 157 days. And that first quarter, if you were one of those people, which I think a lot of our viewers and listeners are, pointing to Damian Lillard's going to be different this year, just trust me, you would point to that first quarter and say, all right, this looks like exactly what we're looking for. Not only the shots that he hit, he just appeared to have more bounce to his game in that quarter.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic sort of like, what do you make of this type thing in the NBA, right? A team comes out shooting the lights out, which I have to say, you don't expect to see that in quarter one of the preseason, right? You always think normally the preseason of, you're working the rust off, and shooting is often a part of the rust that is kind of easiest to see. So it was certainly refreshing to see the Bucks come out and hit 6 to 7 threes. Dame leading that with, some long bombs. I mean, these were not like, 23'9" shots, right? These are him really extending the defense from way out and pulling up and taking shots that, again, like, how many people take these shots? Him and Steph and, I don't know, Luka sometimes. Like, he's in this rarefied era of guys who are even taking some of these off the dribble threes from 30 feet out with regularity, and just looked to be in his comfort zone early on. And just a little bit weird too, because I mean, you look at the Bucks in this game, I think they were 11 of 38 on twos, and 19 of 48, or what was it, 19 of 48 on threes. So the 2-point shooting was just absolutely dreadful, but it really didn't matter in the first quarter because they were getting just everything to go down from three. Brook Lopez looking sharp. We did see Brook Lopez roll to the rim. I think it was on a Dame pick and roll. Had a nice little up and under finish as well. I know you and Camille were talking the other day about, which version of Brook Lopez are we going to see? A Brook Lopez that is, leaning more into rolling and shooting those, those one-handed like 14-foot shots that he's ridiculously good at, / rolling all the way to the rim for alley-oops, or is it going to be more of what we saw last year in terms of him just spotting up from three? Again, certainly early on tonight, it was a lot of everybody just shooting 3-pointers, and they were going in. So letting the good times roll. What was it, 22-6? I think at one point, 20-3.
Yeah. 20-3 was the start. Yeah,
22-6. Then at some point, so yeah. I mean, obviously the first half of the first quarter couldn't have really architected anything much better. Brook blocked, I think, Jalen Duren a couple times at the rim. Brook had a couple steals as well. So I think if you're kind of, deconstructing this game, you would say, good first effort from Dame, good first look from Brook Lopez. I thought Pat Connaughton looked pretty lively on cuts and getting the rim, hit a 3. Gary Trent hit a couple shots early before we'll talk about him apparently injuring his elbow and having to leave thereafter. But pretty much thereafter, after that, and Bobby Portis.
Yeah.
Came off the bench tonight, even with Giannis resting. They went small to start the game with Pat and Torian Prince as the forwards, which typically you see Bobby sort of slot in as the 4 when Giannis is out. Tonight they said, we'll just kind of keep Bobby as the bench 5, which is understandable because that's obviously what he'll do most nights. But Bobby also had his 3-point shot going, had some of his in-between stuff going as well. But other than that, once the young guys came in, let me just say this. I know we all want these preseason post games to be about the great flashes that the young guys showed. And, young player X is really going to push Pat Connaughton, for a rotation spot. I'm like, those old vets, look out. The young guys are playing for them. Yeah, this was not that game. This was the, hey, veterans, you got nothing to worry about. These young guys don't know what the heck is going on. They're making horrendous passes, committing bad fouls, can't hit the broadside of a barn. This was, as terrible as the Bucks summer league team was, which was really bad. Like they were, I know we saw some good things from individual players, but like as a collective group, the Bucks summer league team was hopeless. And after that first quarter, we saw increasingly more and more of those Bucks young players. And yeah, let me just say I'm not banking on a huge contribution. I wasn't banking on a huge contribution from those young guys anyway. And let's just say game 1 of the preseason, it's one game, but certainly I think has not put the veterans on notice as far as young guys coming for rotation spots. Let's just say that one game, but still.
Yeah, there, like, to your point, there was no one that really stood out. It's the preseason, but you still hope to see more. I don't think today's show is the place to get into it, but certainly as we move through the preseason and get closer to that date, that's going to be very important for MarJon Beauchamp. That's another guy that these are the games you need to see something. I know we had that conversation in summer league, but like it's really the last chance to really stand out here. And you were just hoping for one of the young guys to do that. I don't know how much of this is just throw the whole thing out, because look at where it headed and the fact that it was clear you were playing the young guys in the second half and you were getting some run for the vets in the first half. Although I think that was the intention all along. I'm not sure how much of that was molded by Gary Trent Jr. leaving and Doc Rivers saying, you know what, we've seen enough of Brooke and Dame and company for this one. So that's the tough piece is I don't know what to really take from this game when it went the way it did, and just the abnormalities with the 20-3 start. You're up by 11 in the first quarter or at the end of one. You lose by 33. I think it was 117-67 that the Pistons outscored the Bucks after that 20-3 start. But yeah, you were just hoping to see something from one of those young guys. Some of the growth that we said you need to see from Andre Jackson Jr. offensively. MarJon Beauchamp just clinging to anything. So that's, I think, we're just going to keep kicking the can down the road in preseason game number 2 of this is the time that we're going to need to see that. The big piece, though, was what we've mentioned a couple of times now, and that's Gary Trent Jr. leaving this game with a hyperextended elbow. We both thought at the time, in real time watching this, it didn't look like it was anything major. And looking at the replay too, you were still kind of stunned by the way his reaction was immediately after, where you saw him immediately grabbing that in clear pain. So we'll revisit that and what that would mean for the Bucks if we're already talking about injuries with this team in game number 1 in the preseason. So more on what we saw from Gary Trent Jr. prior to the injury and what the injury means coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Well, this next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. And look, it's approaching that time of year, Halloween. It can scare some of us. It can bring out some fears that you didn't know you had. And one way to really tackle some of those fears is with therapy. It is a great tool for facing your fears and finding ways to overcome them, because sometimes the scariest thing is not facing our fears in the first place and holding ourselves accountable. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It is entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can even switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Overcome your fears with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, patreon.com/LockedOnNBA. So we didn't really see much of Gary Trent Jr. I think it was about 13 minutes that he played. I think we saw maybe 2 times in that course of a quarter and a half where he did more than just shoot the ball and put the ball on the floor and attacked on one closeout, I remember, and driving to the lane. So that was one of the things you were really hoping to see. I know Raptors fans and others that have followed Gary Trent Jr., Blazers fans throughout his career, are quick to point out, hey, I know he can do more than Malik Beasley in terms of his offensive profile and shot selection, but be careful with that. My counter would be, I don't know if you guys saw Malik Beasley last year and the adventures that were Malik on the fast break or putting the ball on the floor. The Bucks will take anything they can get there. We spent so much time on this show. I know we talked about it on the pregame show with Dave Kane too, that basically the setup to this game was, man, it seemed like everything that could go wrong for the Bucks did last year, including health. Damian Lillard talked about it. Doc talked about it. Giannis talked about it. So you got to be good. You got to be lucky, and you got to be healthy. And 15 minutes into the first preseason game, we're talking about a starter being hurt.
Yeah, I mean, and look, if you were going to have any starter get hurt, with apologies to Gary Trent, well, obviously, fingers crossed he's going to be fine and, back before the preseason is up. I mean, obviously, he is the 5th starter, right? So, relative to Dame, Giannis, Chris, or Brooke, I would say Gary's the, most replaceable out of the starters, but still, they're obviously counting on him a lot, right? I mean, defensively, he's going to have to be the wing defender in that starting group. And if it's not Gary Trent in the starting 5, raises interesting questions, right? Different directions you could go. Would you go the young route with AJ Green as, kind of the maybe most like for like spot up shooter type guy? But obviously, as much as he's made strides defensively, you obviously don't want to exactly throw AJ into the mix and have to be your defensive wing stopper with the starters. You could go DeLon Wright, who, I thought DeLon looked fine tonight, although I think it also sort of underscored to me, like, look, DeLon's not a put the ball in his hands and let him make plays and run an offense type guy, right? He can, get you into the offense. He had a couple threes off of AJ Johnson drives and kicks in the third quarter tonight. But, for the most part, I mean, DeLon, again, he is a guy that you sign because you have Dame, right? And you need a guy that you can play with Dame or have a defensive guy behind Dame. I still think, and, again, not to over-index on one game, but I've sort of felt all summer, and this really goes back the last couple of years, I've still felt like, man, Bucks could use like one more creator off the bench. And as much as, when you're healthy, you got Dame, Chris, Giannis, and in theory that should be enough. But, again, DeLon is going to do a little bit of creating. He can get the ball up the floor, get you in your offense, hit an open 3. But certainly a Gary Trent type player is important because, as you were saying, like as much as like his efficiency, I think he's been a good 3-point shooter. The efficiency overall has not been there, which I think speaks to the fact that he's not a guy that tends to score efficiently when he's not taking threes. But you kind of hope that maybe that changes this year a little bit. And maybe he gets that, Malik Beasley bump in terms of overall efficiency, but has that better all-around game, able to maybe put it on the deck a little bit more than Bees. Maybe he gets to the free throw line once a week rather than Bees once a month or whatever it felt like, in terms of him getting the free throw line. So, yeah, I mean, losing Gary Trent would be not great for sure. So you just kind of hope it's not a serious injury and that he's back soon. But again, only 4 preseason games is this year. Usually I think the Bucks have typically had about 5. So I don't know, depending on your perspective, that either means there's less runway to get him healthy, or the flip side, these games don't really matter anyway, and we're just kind of, killing time here over the next few weeks, 2-3 weeks before the season starts anyway. So more a race against the clock versus race against getting him back for any specific preseason games. But of course, like you're trying to build chemistry. new guy, the one new guy in the starting five. And now to potentially, if you lose him for the rest of the preseason, you're going to have not had a chance to play your kind of nominal true starting five that you want to have in the regular season. You're not going to have a chance to play those guys at all potentially in the preseason. Like, not ideal, not ideal. So I guess long story short, I guess we should just be happy, Justin, that Dame played 17 minutes, 15 points, 4 assists on 10 shots, 4 or 6 from 3. He did make it out alive and in one piece. So praise be to the basketball gods for that. Brooke, 8 points on 6 shots, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks in 15 minutes. They were both +2 and +1. So they survived. I think Taurean Prince had a brief little scare, but seemed to emerge. 5 points, couple assists, couple blocks. I thought he looked perfectly solid as well. So I don't know, Justin. Glass half full is most everybody else survived in one piece, but certainly Gary Trent will all be a little bit nervous whenever, for the next 24 hours or so as we await word on kind of what comes next, right? Presumably there's an MRI to be done and hopefully some guidance that isn't too scary. Hyperextension, we didn't hear like dislocated elbow.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's just a hyperextension and it's something that, within, I don't know, whatever it is, a week or something like that, it's feeling much better and you can trot him back out there. But obviously losing anybody in game 1 of the preseason on top of, a truly injury to insult in a game like this, not ideal.
Yeah. And I mean, especially the new toy that I think Bucks fans wanted to see the most and were most excited about, to be able to get him on a veteran minimum contract. But to your point, not that we would wish an injury on anyone, but if there is any starter that you would say you're going to have to miss some time from, I think you would bump him to the top of the list in terms of what you're able to take on and overcome with that. We were talking about it before we started recording too. I don't know what the timeline is. And it's not like every injury is standard. But I don't know what to expect. Like, we're just kind of in wait and see mode in terms of what this means for him. Being a realist, depending on you want to phrase that as a pessimist by nature, I would say, look, I'm just expecting he's not going to play for the rest of the preseason, given a hyperextended elbow. Maybe we see him late. But yeah, then the question becomes who starts. And, Frank, I know you got into it a little bit, but Pat Connaughton, if there is a revenge tour, and I think Camille and I talked about this at some point over the summer and you and I too, boy, wouldn't it be something if for all of the slander Pat Connaughton has had to deal with, if he has a bounce back season, so much to the level of Bucks fans saying this contract's an albatross and we got to get rid of it. The Pat Connaughton plays good enough that he opts out of that deal and signs elsewhere. An injury to Gary Trent Jr. opening the door for Pat Connaughton to slide in there and do some of those things, I think would be step one in that being the case.
Yeah, I mean, it always felt like when Bud was around, Bud always, it seemed like he liked Pat and George Hill. I always think of those guys as guys who seemed far less likely to start than like logically they should. It seemed like there should have been a better chance of those guys starting when there were injuries than what actually happened, because Bud just seemed to like bringing them off the bench. I think the question with Pat, I mean, certainly last year Doc gave him a long leash. I thought he looked totally fine tonight. Like I mentioned, had a couple cuts to score at the basket, hit a 3, did some Pat basically type stuff. But I also don't know that. I mean, he started Prince and Pat alongside Gary and Dame tonight. So I've been assuming that Taurean Prince will be the, small forward starter when until Chris comes back, whenever that might be. And again, not that there have been any concerning news on Chris since media day, or the day before media day, when I think Chris Haynes was reporting that Chris was still not doing 5-on-5. Does Chris actually play on opening night? Like, I have no idea. I mean, he's clearly doing stuff in practice, and you see him suited up, and I mean, he's doing stuff. He doesn't seem to be far off from 5-on-5, but until he's practicing, obviously his return is not imminent. So I've been sort of assuming that, God willing, Giannis is healthy, Brooke is healthy, Dame. And I'd been assuming Gary Trent would be healthy, but now that is raising up the air. I'd been assuming Taurean Prince would be the small forward starter, sort of like the heir apparent to Jay Crowder in that regard. But yeah, I hadn't really been thinking about like, well, who's going to start at the 2, because I was like, well, that's what Gary Trent signed here for, right? Because they said you'll be the starter. So I don't know what's going to, I don't know. Does Doc like Pat even playing as a 2? Or would you potentially prefer to give, one of the younger guys maybe a look? Kind of all up for grabs, but certainly the next few games, I mean, we'll get certainly if Gary is out, we'll get a strong hint at it, because he'll have to start somebody, right? And hopefully we'll see. I could certainly see Giannis playing in the next game potentially. Coming up, and if that happens, then obviously like things start to form a little bit. So okay, if Giannis comes back, then you've got Dame ? Taurean Prince, Giannis, Brooke probably as your starting 5. So yeah, at that point, Doc would have to make a call, and obviously we know he said went out of his way unprompted to be complimentary of AJ Green's summer, and so if you're looking for just like the pure, doesn't need the ball, will just space the floor guy, obviously AJ is probably the most obvious guy. He's probably the most similar to what Malik gave you last year, and arguably what Gary would give you this year. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly arguments for DeLon Wright. There's arguments for Pat. Andre Jackson, again, not that Andre has covered himself in glory, and certainly in Summer League has abbreviated stint for. He got hurt tonight, also didn't look great. But, part of the challenge evaluating these young guys is all of them just clearly need to be playing with 4 really competent NBA players, and none of them have an all-around skill set. Yeah, none of them has the all-around skill set, especially as like a shot creator scorer at this point, to be able to really like help buoy a group of young guys. And we saw that in Vegas as well. Like, they're just too much specialists, like Livingston can't do much with the ball. MarJon, obviously, I mean, a year ago in the opening preseason game, MarJon had 18 points and 9 rebounds, right? So again, it's just like what version of MarJon you're going to get is just, he had an early 3 kind of rim out tonight, had a couple of defensive moments, but just never really seemed to kind of get unstuck in this game. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things, but certainly with Gary going down, presumably here we'll make a bit more of an open competition here over the rest of preseason in terms of not just the vets getting some run, but also these young guys will maybe get a little more leash to get time to at least show what they can do. And again, I would love to see them play more with veteran guys, including the good players, because I just feel like that's going to be a more representative sort of sample of like what they would actually look like when, you play for real. Because again, like they just don't, like Andre is probably the best example, right? He's just too limited. Like he's got to be out there with guys that can soak up offensive possession. Like if Andre is like having to do stuff offensively, like it's not going to work.
It's I mean, in some ways it's like way back when I remember, I forget what year it was, but it was part of the terrible era of Brewers baseball in the early 2000s when you had Lenny Harris as your pinch hitter, and they were so protective and like, we can't move Lenny Harris. He's the best pinch hitter in the league. Well, you're a bad team. Like, how often are you going to use this? Like, in theory, Lenny Harris is great, but what are the opportunities he's going to have? And in some ways it's the same with like, in theory, this is great. They can do this, this, and this, but they're not the table setters that you need to be healthy for this to really shine with this team.
What's your kind of assessment? I thought it was interesting tonight. I think we were all looking to see which guys would get in when. And I think more or less it was consistent with kind of what our perceived pecking order is for the young guys. I think AJ Green got the first look. I think Andre, MarJon, like that 3 like all came in relatively early in the first half. So it's not like they had to wait long. Chris Livingston didn't come in until I believe the second half. AJ came in early in the third quarter. Tyler Smith we saw eventually as well. But kind of like what I would expect based on sort of what we saw last year and what we know in terms of Doc's preference order for these guys. So I don't think necessarily there were any surprises in terms of, again, the kind of pecking order of who's where we think Doc might see these guys fitting in and all that. But again, it's just hard to say once Dame. I mean, again, Dame played 15, 16 minutes. I think he played the first 8 minutes.
Yeah.
He played a little bit in this, played some in the second half or second quarter, but didn't play at all in the third, fourth quarter. So at that point, kind of all bets are off for me. Once it's AJ Johnson and DeLon Wright running the offense, how much you take away from those minutes is kind of, be my guess, but it's kind of meaningless in terms of what it's going to indicate for regular season time.
Yeah, I thought there's been one narrative that I think we, as in you, me, and Camille, have been up against from a lot of Bucks fans this summer, and I think a lot of that is hope. But I think you got a good glimpse at it so far with some of those rotations that you talked about. We'll get into that conversation and preview what's next for the Bucks Thursday night. LeBron James and Bronny James come to Milwaukee for preseason game number 2. So we'll dig into that coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Well, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Doesn't even have to win, and you get that bonus bet guaranteed. That's at FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to look at the odds and get started. So I don't know how much of it you heard or had Bucks fans interacting with you throughout the summer, but I think one of the big things Camille and I were certainly witnessing was the groundswell for AJ Johnson, where it went in the span of a month from terrible pick. What are they doing?
Who the hell is this guy?
Right. Who is this guy? What are we doing here? Why don't we just trade the pick and package it with Pat Connaughton and bring in somebody else? To, okay, maybe there's something here in a few summer league games, to really hyping yourself up on that, to the point where we've heard quite a bit of AJ Johnson's going to play a lot. And I'm telling you, he's going to be the guy that takes over. I mean, I still don't believe that to be the case, if for no other reason than the numbers game that's in front of him. But look, and it's not just a Doc Rivers thing, as we've had to go over. It's most coaches in the league. You're not just going to insert young player over a vet that you have experience and history with. But I think the way he was used tonight is probably the biggest tell, to your point of it was all the young guys. But even if we examine the pecking order of when the young guys came in, he was pretty far down the list.
Yeah, and I think we saw why. I mean, he's a really interesting prospect because, you look at the different aspects of his game, his physical tool set, kind of offense, defense. You can talk yourself into all of the kind of aspects of his game evolving into something above average and potentially even exciting, right? Well, with his speed, is he going to be, a guy that gets to the basket and creates havoc and creates shots for teammates? His 3-point shot kind of fell off at the very end of Summer League, but he made threes at a good clip in the first few games of Summer League, right? Which I had no idea. I kind of was joking about it. I couldn't find any stats on his high school 3-point shooting. We saw he shot poorly in really limited minutes in Australia. I have no idea. I don't know if he can shoot free throws even. It's just so weird. We have so little data on him that you're just extrapolating from very, very little. And so I think for me, that means you have to be just really cautious and manage, expectations and be realistic. And I think tonight, it was a rough performance, right? I mean, he was not playing against, the starting 5 of the Detroit Pistons really tonight, but 1 for 8, 3 turnovers, three really bad turnover, like three really bad passes. Did have a couple of like drives where he drew the defense, kicked to DeLon Wright to hit open threes. Got to the paint a fair bit, but had one, even his one basket was like a block. He got blocked and then went back up and put it in from close. But he just looked like a really young guy who's like trying to figure out like how he attacks NBA defenses, which again is reasonable. But if you're watching this game trying to figure out like which of these players is going to actually have a chance to make any sort of positive impact regular season wise, or obviously like to raise the bar even higher in the playoffs, you certainly wouldn't look at what he was doing tonight as a guy that seemed like he was figuring it out, or could really leverage the tools that he has in a way that kind of translated to like productive scoring, creation, etc. Like it was he kind of was getting the basket and sort of throwing it up sort of at the rim, and again, maybe on some nights they go in at a little higher rate. But I think the thing, having now watched him obviously in summer league, we get this glimpse of him tonight. He only took 1 3 tonight, which I think was kind of a rushed air ball three, if I remember correctly. Obviously, like 3-point shooting is critical for any guard, right? So that has to be solid at least. But he's a guy that, because he's at this point, like he just doesn't have a lot of strength, he just seems like a guy who needs like some kind of like floater type shot, but he really does not seem to have any sort of in between game. Like he took a very sort of strange high arcing mid range shot at one point in this game that he missed, but kind of similar. I don't know that he scored anything in the mid range in Vegas. It's all like he gets all the way to the rim, or he passes it out. Like he does not really look to have much comfort level taking a little push shot or something like that, or just a quick little step back from 15 feet or something like that. So again, like that's just a part of his game that's sort of a blank slate right now, and I'd be fascinated to know kind of like what they work on with him. And again, like it was cool seeing Rajon Rondo coaching and working with him in particular. Some pictures of him showing Rondo showing him some stuff on an iPad or whatever. Rajon Rondo probably not going to be the guy that that teaches AJ Johnson how to be an NBA scorer. Hopefully they're talking a lot about playmaking and defense and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. Certainly this was a rough outing, and like I said, I mean, we've seen, I would say, like the history of Bucks preseason. We've had a lot of I always think back to Rashad Vaughn in the whatever it was 2016, 2015, I think 2015.
Yeah.
Preseason, when he like had a bunch of like pretty good scoring games as a rookie, and that pretty much was the peak of Rashad Vaughn's like tenure as a Milwaukee Buck, or at least his stock topped out in that first preseason. So you just never know, right? Like it can mean something, it can mean nothing, swinging both ways. And yeah, I mean, hopefully, AJ got 18 minutes tonight. I mean, that number presumably is probably not going to go up from here, with the veterans probably playing more from here on out. But obviously they want to get him some run and give him some reps, and I think we all want to see it, because it would be good if he could get maybe a little bit of confidence at some point here in the preseason. But yeah, certainly he looked very much like the 19-year-old sort of undercooked, trying to figure it out, a couple years away type guy that certainly like everybody was presuming he would be on draft night at best. And yeah, I mean, tonight certainly was not a case of him making a case for why why Doc Rivers is going to need to play him this season at some point. But it goes back to my comment earlier. I do think the Bucks could really use another playmaker.
Yeah.
And it would be amazing if we could get the version of AJ Johnson who hopefully 2 years from now is going to be a lot more mature and confident and stronger. It would be great if we could get that version of the guy this year, and maybe that's kind of shot in the arm type change of pace guy off the bench. But yeah, I mean, certainly, again, based on the small sample we have now, like I have a hard time banking on that, right? That seems more like a wouldn't it be nice type thing, rather than something that, you can count on with any remote, reasonable expectation, right? I mean, young players in general stink. Rookies generally stink and don't help you win games in the NBA. If you're playing them, you're mostly playing them because you want to lose or because you just need somebody to kind of eat innings. So again, that's not really an insult to AJ to say that he's probably not going to be a guy that positively impacts anything as a rookie. But yeah, again, like, let's just say tonight did not look particularly close to being one of the rare, exceptions to the rule, so let's say.
Well, and we heard so much in what we just talked about there of some of the things that you see that you could harness and develop, and he could fill some of those gaps that are missing with this team. And again, I don't think even the most how would I word it, supportive of AJ Johnson fans there are out there are suggesting in any way that he is the next Giannis in terms of his growth and development. But that's what you heard kicked around a lot as, oh, the Bucks took a lottery ticket out on Giannis, and look what happened there. And you can see some of the similar things in terms of the raw talent that you could develop with him. And I don't dispute that. But the difference is those first 3 years that Giannis played, I mean, the Bucks won like 85 games total, that you had the opportunity for him to grow and learn and grow into what he was going to be. This is a team that is, we've said many times, I mean, this could be it this year. If it doesn't work with Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, potentially free agents and exiting, and just an overall older roster, there's more urgency on this season, and you don't have that affordability to say, okay, just throw him 15 minutes and get out there and see what you can do on a significant stretch of playing time. So that's the big difference. But look, it's a preseason game, but I think to that point, it did kind of stand out of there's guys that you trust that can go out there and are just professional players. DeLon Wright, some of the strengths that he brings of what he can do defensively, who he's on the floor with, and shots that he can hit, organizing things, but like getting things going and facilitating. That's not him. That's not really anybody else on this roster outside of Damian Lillard. And that could be one of the big things we circle and say, okay, what do the Bucks do to address this, or can they address it as we move further and further into the season? I think the last player, as we start to wrap here, worth calling attention to from what we saw was just the way Bobby Portis looked and the importance that he's going to carry for the team this season and the role that he plays. We didn't see a whole lot of it just because of it being the preseason and all, but I think the interesting thing to keep an eye on with Bobby is how they use him and some of the changes that we heard Doc kind of hint at. We're going to see on the defensive side that there's always been these sets of rules for when Bobby is out there and Brook is out there. Doc has been very vague, and he even said tonight before the game, look, we haven't even installed any of these things that they've been working on in practice, but just keeping an eye on that in how they use Bobby Portis defensively and what that could mean for his value and just overall output this season.
First off, you just got done training camp and you haven't installed this defense that's supposedly going to change something. When are we going to do that exactly? There's like no practice.
It's in the week between preseason and regular season. That's where the install goes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of funny hearing the talk about how like Doc, some of the comments about like stuff like, oh, they've never done this sort of stuff before. And it's like, okay, like we went through the experience exactly a year ago. Like we're clearly not going to see Brook out there not dropping, right? Brook is going to be in a zone drop, right? Some version of that. And again, you can modulate, depending on if it's Chris Porzingis setting a screen, then of course you're not going to, drop down into the paint as aggressively as you would against, Jalen Duren or Andre Drummond or something like that. But, on its most basic level, right, you're not being ultra aggressive with Brook. Sure. I don't know. Again, like I watched this game. Obviously, I have not watched a replay of the game. I did not see, some vastly different,
Yeah.
version of the Bucks defensively. I think I don't think we saw Bobby. I don't recall Bobby being very aggressive defensively in terms of like blitzing or anything like that. So I think in terms of, them maybe just having like the same set of rules for Bobby and Brooke for the most part, right? Like you can always kind of go into something different as a change of pace, but it certainly that could be part of the hypothesis here is that they're going to be more conservative with Bobby and say, all right, Bobby, we're going to keep you closer to the rim, and maybe that'll be less confusing / less bad than having you trap and putting the whole defense into rotation, 25 feet from the hoop. So yeah, we'll see. Again, like it's always kind of hard to read this too, like when you essentially have Pat Connaughton instead of Giannis in the starting five. It's a little bit hard to make heads or tails of how different it might actually be. But once you have Giannis, Brooke, and I would say Dame honestly too, because obviously
Yeah.
Dame is the guy defensively that you have to game plan around if you're the Bucks, from a less than ideal perspective versus Giannis and Brooke, who you're obviously sort of predicating on as those guys being the erasers of mistakes. So we'll see. Hopefully we see obviously the full group, including Gary Trent, healthy, but at a minimum, I think I want to see what Brooke, Giannis together look like, and if there's something we can detect in that regard. But I'll just say this: I think we'd all be shocked if what Doc is trying to do doesn't involve a lot of Giannis and Brooke being at the rim, protecting the paint. And certainly tonight, it seemed like they were not trying to gift wrap paint points, paint opportunities for the Pistons, especially in that kind of early stages when Brooke was out there. And again, Brooke looked, I thought, very good. So we'll see. We'll as folks kind of dig into some of the film, we'll see if there's any really appreciable differences. But again, like we know if this team works well, it's going to be because it starts with Giannis and Brooke and those guys playing at a super high level, and then hopefully other guys stepping up, especially on the wing where you obviously need some help.
Yeah, I mean from what I remember, we only really saw one sequence of that aggressive play with one of the bigs out there on the perimeter, and it was Brooke. It wasn't even Bobby. But that to me is more the regular season thing to keep an eye on of how different does this look? Because even the whole we have Brooks rules and Bobby's rules. If you eliminate that, I think it's more of just finding a happy medium. Because asking Bobby Portis to go with the same type of presence as Brooke Lopez, we've seen he's 6'10", 6'11". The wingspan is 6'10", 6'11". He's not a rim protector. So that to me is just the thing that I'm most interested to see, and we're not going to see it until the regular season begins. And apparently everything has been installed for this team. But hey, we may see.
In fairness, if I remember correctly, Bobby Portis measured at a 7'2" wingspan in Chicago in 2015. But I agree, he certainly does not play like a 7'2" wingspan.
Well, it plays like what a 6'7" wingspan.
Yeah, not a lot of rim protection. By the way, before we drop, shout out to Taurean Prince, had a really nice block. I mentioned Brooke Lopez getting some blocks. I think we had a few other, like moments. Like some of the young guys had nice little like individual defensive efforts. Marjon had a couple blocks. Who else had block? DeLon Wright had a block. Chris Livingston had a block. And Liam Robbins, who I literally, had heard his name, but knew essentially nothing about him as one of the kind of camp bodies, like the camp big guy body. 3 blocks in 9 minutes, and I was like, oh, you actually seem like you have some. He looks like, where is Liam Robbins from? He looks like he's Australian with that haircut. He's got kind of a garbage haircut. Shout out to Kane, our dear friend. But I don't think he's actually Australian, is he? But he blocked 3 shots in 9 minutes. was a -17 because nobody on the floor could score for the Bucks. They scored 9 points in the fourth quarter. But yeah, he had some moments, I thought. Shout out to Liam Robbins. He's 25 years old, but technically a rookie. Last played Vanderbilt in college.
Yeah, he is not from Australia. This should come as no surprise. He's billed as from Iowa, I think Davenport. But in looking through this, I'm going to have to see if we can get some type of exclusive with him, because it says Liam Robbins was born in my hometown of Waukesha, Wisconsin.
Really?
So we'll see if we can't grease the wheels here and have the exclusive with Liam Robbins. One more game this week. That is Thursday night, when I mentioned the Lakers come to town. I would assume we're not going to see LeBron and Bronny playing, since they did tonight, but who knows? Maybe we'll see that. I think of course, all the attention is going to be on, the Lakers going against Darvin Ham and Taurean Prince, and how much those were both fan favorites. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of press looking to get those questions into that duo.
By the way, Liam Robbins, speaking of huge preseason storylines, there's Bronny and then there's Liam Robbins. Liam Robbins, 22-23 SEC Defensive Player of the Year at Vanderbilt. Shout out to Liam, blocked over 3 shots a game. So that's what he does. Little rim protection. Maybe we can. I'm just gonna throw it out there. Are we gonna get people in the comments saying like Brooke Lopez replacement ? Maybe some of the people that are wish casting Brooke to be punted into outer space and never return to the Bucks because he can't defend on an island. But yeah, he shot 37% from 3 in his last year at Vandy as well. So pleasant surprise. Liam Robbins, the best young player on the Bucks in the first preseason game. Maybe.
Very experienced too. 3 different colleges that he played for with Drake, Minnesota, and Vanderbilt. So potentially a developing story here with what we saw from Liam Robbins. But that'll do it for today's show. We hope there's more takeaways from Thursday's game, other than just one quarter that you could point to and say, see, when it works, it really works. And hopefully there's no more injuries either in Thursday's game. Any closing thoughts on everything we just touched on, Frank?
No,
Other than Robbins, and I need the address so I can send you a 15 Robbins jersey. Yeah,
if you didn't see this game, consider yourself lucky. This was maybe rewatch the first quarter. If you want to rewatch this game, rewatch the first quarter and then stop and then move on and use the rest of your day more productively. That would be my recommendation.
If you didn't see the game and you're thinking, oh man, did I re-up my league pass so I can go watch this? You're good. You're good. Just search for highlights on Twitter and you'll get the Damian Lillard shots and the Gary Trent Jr. 3. That'll do it for today's show, though. As we mentioned, another post game after Thursday's game, and a lot more content to get to throughout the week as well. For Frank, I am Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.